Okay, now it's time to shift gears and move into the period of adolescence. So again, this is the teenage years. We're going to say from approximately 13 to 18 or 19 years old. And we will begin by looking at the physical and cognitive developmental issues. I didn't draw a lot of attention to some issues such as puberty because I think the textbook does a nice job at describing some of those issues. And I'm sure you've had a lot of that information already presented to you in prior health classes. I do want to talk a little bit about the brain developmental issues in adolescence, though. There are some very real issues that may explain some of the behaviors that we see that seem to spike a little bit more during the adolescent years. So, first of all, we mentioned that there was, kind of a burst of glial cell action in that birth to 2 age range, and then we said we'd see some more of that again during adolescence. And that is absolutely the case. And that glial cell, remember, is very much responsible for myelination, which is that insulation around the neural pathways that really expedites and makes our neural communication process much more efficient in nature. So there is quite a bit of activity that's happening during the adolescent developmental stages. The other issue that happens is that our neurons can be more responsive to excitatory neurotransmitters. So what an adolescent will often do is respond in a very intense way. It might be a really intense happy or a really intense sad, a little bit more so than maybe during other developmental stages. And it's partly due to what's happening with the brain during this stage and developmental period. So when they experience an event, they're just experiencing it in a more intense way. So, for instance, getting invited to the prom can, set you off on this like amazing, you're like on this super kind of high, and maybe ending a relationship with a significant other can really seem like the end of the world. In fact, sometimes you'll see adolescents ending a relationship, and it looks like they're more devastated than someone who's been married for 20 years or so getting divorced. And again, it's not necessarily indicative of that relationship mattered more than the marriage of 20 years. It's really about the biology of what's happening with that person. Another really important point of brain development I want to bring your attention to is that the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions, is pretty well established and well developed. However, the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain, is not as well developed. And that's the part of the brain that's responsible for really important tasks such as planning and impulsivity, kind of reducing that, helping you make good decisions. So you can see that a lot of adolescents are more likely to engage in risky behaviors, and some of it has a social atmosphere and connection to it, and some of it really is related to the brain developmental issues. I did post, I am linking a great TED Talk on adolescent brain development that I'd like you to watch to just kind of learn a little bit more about the inner workings of the adolescent brain. Now, if we look at, there's many issues. I mean, when you speak of adolescence, there's lots and lots that are happening. And we could talk about depression or eating disorders or sexual issues or substance abuse. And all of these are very real issues. They are discussed in your text, I think, pretty well. So I just want to bring a couple of points into this conversation here. These are very real issues. So, sometimes folks come up to me and say, well, isn't that adolescent just doing it for attention, maybe making some kind of suicidal threat or ideation? And the answer is if somebody needs attention through that means, then we have to give them a little bit of attention. The depressive rates during adolescence are, pretty significant. So I would say approximately 20% or so of adolescents are going to experience depressive symptoms. And we have to take those symptoms pretty seriously. Again, they are experiencing emotions in a more intense way. We just discussed that with brain development. And this is really, a very trying time for some adolescents. It can be quite significant, their symptomology. And we want to make sure that we don't have them move into a place where they, might be faced with suicidal ideation and things of that nature. Eating disorders also kind of becomes a little bit more prevalent during the adolescent years, and this is one of the psychological disorders that is a little bit more difficult to treat. I would say this and substance use is more difficult. Depression's a little bit easier to manage. We have a lot more success with medication combined with like cognitive behavioral therapy. And we can be successful with the eating disorders and substance issues, but these are more challenging in nature to address because they're a little bit more complex, I think, in what kind of treatment is needed. So oftentimes we need to use kind of a family system approach. Sometimes there might be hospitalization that's needed for some of these, whether it's detoxing off of a drug or to help them really start to establish better eating habits or get to a healthy, physically get to a healthier spot before you're dealing with some of the emotional issues too. As we know, sexual activity also begins usually, during adolescence, and this can be, either a wonderful scenario or a really awful scenario. So we need to make sure that adolescents have the right information. They often are relying on friends or the internet and getting information that may not be quite right. So we want to make sure that they do know how to protect themselves so that their actions don't lead to long-term consequences such as diseases and pregnancies and things of that nature. We also want to think about their emotional well-being, and there's a lot of regret after sexual activity, and certainly the more that substances are linked with the sexual activity leads to poor decision making and can also be problematic. So these are some very important issues that we need to just kind of think about and consider, and you can go ahead and explore what your author Laura Burke has to say about these topics. She brings in lots of good data for you to look at. In terms of cognitive development, we are now with Piaget's last stage. So last time we were at the concrete operational, now we're at the formal operational. And he basically lumps 12-year-olds and older into one category, the formal operational period. And what he's really focused on here is that we are shifting from needing to work with tangible or concrete kinds of things that you can kind of touch and see to more abstract concepts. So if you think about concepts such as justice or love, those aren't things you can kind of touch or see. But now, at this stage of the game, the adolescents are having enough cognitive power, really, and skill set to really start talking about these more complex, vague, non-tangible topics. And they can also engage in much higher level thinking and engage in scientific thinking. So their problem-solving skills in general are going to be much more sophisticated now. Metacognition is also another new skill that kind of develops during this time period, and that's really the ability to think about your thinking. So you're self-reflecting and you're trying to decide, are you on track, are you not on track? And that really does help a lot with, tasks such as goal monitoring to make sure you're on target. Now, there are still some problems with thinking, and it is very common for adolescents to engage in distorted thinking. And here are a couple of examples of the distorted thinking that's fairly universal across adolescents. One is the imaginary audience. Most adolescents think that everyone is looking at them. So that kind of makes them be very self-conscious. So, if you make one wrong step, everyone in the school is going to notice. Well, the truth is everyone is so hyper-focused on themselves, it's almost next to impossible for everyone to be looking at you. So it's not really an accurate perception, but you certainly are pretty consumed by that, and it can obviously make an impact on your behaviors and actions. The other one is a personal fable, and what this is, and this one's even this is more problematic, really, I believe, because you have this sense of almighty importance and that you're invincible. Like, yeah, I know that people might text and drive and kill someone, but not me. I know how to text. I am very skilled at texting and driving at the same time, so that won't happen to me. Or, yeah, I know you're not supposed to drink and drive, but again, I know my limits, and I know whether I can get in the car or not. And they just think that nothing bad will happen to them. So as a result of this kind of thinking, this is really problematic because you're feeding into risky actions because, I can speed down the road and nothing will happen to me, or I can text and drive or drink and drive and nothing will happen to me. I can have sex without protection and I'm not going to get pregnant, or I'm not going to have a disease. So you kind of can see how this sort of thinking can be quite problematic. The last topic I want to bring your attention to is dropouts, because dropping out of high school is obviously setting someone up for, just kind of disaster, really, in terms of their future. There's a ton of research out there that speaks to the, just the grim future, really, of high school dropouts. It's next to impossible for them to really get out of the lower socioeconomic status. Is it possible? Sure, there's always exceptions to every rule. And I'm sure you've heard of stories, folks who dropped out of high school and, There's a lot of famous people who have dropped out of high school and yet were quite successful. So we're not making a blanket statement here that one equals. It's not a causal statement at all, but we are talking about a high correlation between dropping out and negative outcomes in the future. So what we want to try to do is think about how schools can prevent this from happening. And, a couple strategies, as you can see on the slide, are to really have a lot of different options. So not everyone may be college bound. We have some other voc tech options, some other options for students to really explore and build their skill set to help them be functional in the world upon graduation. We also want to help them if they're struggling academically or personally. So we need to provide supportive services such as tutoring or counseling. We want to make connections with the community and, make sure that we have a good alliance with the parents or other family members or other members of the community to try to surround this person with a support system. As you recall from our resilience conversation, support is one of the key variables really in helping people be resilient. And then sometimes students are hooked with an extracurricular activity. I think that we too often minimize the role of extracurricular activities in school. I'm not even a fan of the word extracurricular. I kind of like co-curricular better because I think that it really is another really essential part of what we're doing. We're teaching them to be a part of a team and maybe even develop leadership skills and different, whether it's a sports kind of team or some kind of club or organization, whatever it might be. Those are also very important skill sets that we can help them learn. So we want to try to do all we can to help students be the best that they can be and certainly graduate with a high school diploma and ready to take on, the next chapter of their life after high school.